victim blaming, having someone turn their actions around to be the other person's fault.
I feel like it's a lot of things. It has a lot to do with like growing up before I went to college. For example, it was a lot of things that I was taught to do to try to avoid this from happening, or certain things that I feel like I had to go about to try and protect myself that maybe other people didn't. Or lessons like, make sure you are wearing certain things, don't leave your drink, all these types of things that had to be taught to me, but I don't, but it shouldn't have been. Those are things that we shouldn't have to be concerned with.
And I think that gray area or uncertainty is like part of what makes rape culture such a sensitive topic, because nobody wants to be considered a bad person and nobody wants to be considered a victim either.
It's important for people to notice what it is in order to not normalize it so much, because I feel like there is a lot of it that is normalized. Okay, anything from like catcalling and stuff like that, making someone feel uncomfortable, especially after you've expressed, hey, like, I'm not consenting to this. This is not okay. You are bothering me. Type thing.
My thing would be that, because when it comes to especially women of color, and body shapes, it's something that we can't control. That's just how your body may be made, and that is not your fault. I know there may be a lot of like victim blaming, or if I'm like, if I wasn't as curvy, if I wasn't this or that.
I really appreciate the question just explicitly says like for the Black community, because I feel like it is very different. And kind of to Jaharia, am I pronouncing your name right? Jaharia? To your point, I feel like for women of color, particularly for Black women, I think we have a hard time saying that like something like that we need help. And so I feel like with rape culture, it's hard to just admit that something is rape just because you don't want to admit that you need help, or that they're like, that you were like defenseless in a certain situation because of like the ways that we like imagine Black women as like super women to a degree. And I think it's like embarrassing and it's shameful to go ahead and like bring these things up and call them for what they are. And it's so much easier, at least temporarily, to kind of just address these things as like they just happen and they don't really matter.
Well, I work as a victim advocate, and the things that I noticed that when we have women of color, specifically Black women, as the victim and a Black young man as the offender, everybody wants to take his side, and trying to make sure that these young ladies know that being fast is not a thing. You're not getting attacked because you're fast. You're not getting attacked because you're wearing something. You're not getting attacked or violated for anything that has to do with you. That is all on him. That is all his decision. That is all his choices. And we keep putting all of the onus on our young women. And I've been in cases where I've had a school show up for the defendant and one lone counselor showing up for the victim, right? Because we don't want to ruin his life, but we're not thinking about the long-term and generational effects it has on hers. And we have to stop almost like, I want to say, sacrificing our young women to try to save our young men. And it's hard. I am a mother of sons. I have very intricate conversation on what consent looks like, because my children will not go out in the world making that choice and saying that they didn't know the difference, because I did not have sons to ruin somebody else's daughter.
You want to put it on the parents sometimes when people do something wrong, but then you also have that, like, you knew it was wrong because it's so many times that you've had people tell you, hey, don't do XYZ. And that's even going from something simple to where you're like, yeah, I know this wrong, but if I don't get caught, ain't nobody gonna know. So I feel like that's still, like, as time goes on, it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until they do this and they're like, oh, I'm untouchable because I've never gotten in trouble for anything I've done before. And it's this thing that, like, as it called, like the snowball effect, like it's one thing, then it's another. And so it's just like, because you have some people who continuously do it and they're like, oh, I didn't know it was wrong. And I'm like, it was wrong day one, so on day 20 it's still wrong. Like, so yeah.
And I think in the Black community too, we have so many like horror stories of people being wrongfully convicted, and there's so much fear that so many people have that they're, especially so many, like even for victims, like that they're going to contribute to that, even though they were obviously like, you know, wronged. And I think that that also makes it very different as opposed to like what you see in the white community. Just because of like the ways that we have so much fear of like wrongful conviction within the Black community.
I think we saw that, for example, even though Meg Thee Stallion wasn't raped, but like the fear that she expressed that she didn't want to call the cops on Tory Lanez when he shot her. And I think that is something that translates over with women being scared to report their abusers, because we know how police treat Black men, but it's also like we have to protect ourselves too and not dismiss the fact that you hurt me as well. And you knew the consequences of what you were doing. But I think that's a very valid point. It's the distrust and fear of wrongful accusations. And a lot of survivors don't recognize that they are survivors until sometimes years down the line. And so that also doesn't help when it's like time has passed. Now they feel like they're not going to be believed. Now they're questioning if it was real. All of that type of stuff comes into play.
Well, when you think about that and you look at the victimization that goes on for long periods of time, okay, and you guys are all way younger than me. I will clearly admit I am 54 years old. I have 6 children, ages from my oldest is 37 and my youngest is 14. And so I'll put that out there. It's a mixed family, both step and natural children, but they're all mine. So go back to say the R. Kelly days. Everybody knew what he was doing, right? We all knew it. And then younger victims come in, and then we put it on the victim, right? We did all this. So then we come to now 20, whatever it was, and people want to act shocked and dismayed. But now we have 30 some odd victims, when had we listened to the first 4 that we clearly knew about, something was happening. And again, look at what was happening. Look at what people, even in the documentary, how they treated those victims, right? That came, well, why'd you wait so long? Well, because nobody was listening when I first told you, right? We knew at age is just a number, what he was about. And let's stop, yes. And for full disclosure, I am a retired police officer. I was a police officer for 18 years in the city of Oakland, and then I transitioned to now I work for the DA's office as a victim advocate. And so just for full transparency, and the things that I've seen. And the things that I've seen is like over and over and over again, when we finally get somebody that's brave enough to come forward, she's being ostracized by so many entities, family, friends, school, even people's parents. Well, if you hadn't been walking around in them little ass shorts, you made him do this. But that's the conversation that these young ladies are having, like real conversations that they get. And so we ignore things in the beginning, and then it snowballs. And so now we've created 5 victims. We created 10 victims. Now we're at 31, and everybody wants to be shocked. This thing that came out with T.I. and Tiny. Think about this, right? Now everybody's like, oh, well, maybe we better pull out. Somebody knew, and they protected him. And because of that, how many more victims have been created? So what I ask to you guys, and why is it that is your responsibility? Why is it your responsibility protect that person who's going to create more young women, young Black women, victims that don't have access to services, that don't have access to those things that other victims might have access to? I have a victim of a sexual assault right now in a treatment center in some other state. And I have two other victims of sexual assault who happen to look a lot like me that are flunking out of college because they can't get a counselor to just talk and unpack some of this stuff. And so somewhere the responsibility has got to been taken off of your shoulders. It is not your responsibility to protect. You can say whatever you want by the police, but when they hurt you and they leave you for dead, your responsibility is to yourself. And I'll sign off with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say to Jaria's comment earlier that they know what they're doing is wrong. In many cases, that is true, right? When we're talking about sexual assault, and oftentimes those are pretty egregious, but also the more insidious ones are the ones that don't know that what they're doing is wrong. They're emotionally coercing folks, they're strong arming folks mentally, and they think that that's fine. You know, I don't think that we have clear understandings of what healthy boundaries are, healthy relationship boundaries are. And then it's not clear to the survivor either. Was I raped? Because I don't feel good about what happened last night, but I didn't say no, and it's my partner, and I don't really know how to navigate that. And you add in all of these other things, they're not going to come forward oftentimes because they're going to get ostracized, and they're going to get, you know, have to go through a system that puts them on trial versus the perpetrator. And it's just a no-win situation. But I just wanted to put it out there that a lot of them don't think that they're doing anything wrong, which is really insidious and messed up. And until we start to talk about that, it's not going to shift.
When it comes to that, it's like it's a very sharp double-edged sword, because there's a lot of rape culture that's perpetuated by men. However, at the same time, it seems like there's a large amount of women who don't feel like men can also like participate in it, or like have any action like thrown against them as well too. So I think it's really important on both sides for people to really just educate themselves, I guess, as much as possible. It's always crazy too, because it's like, okay, yeah, educate yourself on this stuff or whatever, but it seems like the people who are the most willing to be educated aren't necessarily the ones who need it. So that's also an issue in itself. But I don't. It's important on both sides for both men and women to pretty much just educate themselves, because it definitely, what goes around comes around. Not men, women, non-binary, everybody. Like,
I mean,
and to that point too, because both of y'all are like right on it. I really just don't understand why, like, as far as like men and women's roles, just like why friends don't check friends. Like sometimes I just wish that like guy friends would be willing to check their guy friends. Like, if you see this shit is happening, if you see this stuff is happening, like, why don't you say something when you're right there? And I know it's uncomfortable, but like, literally, I think Beverly had said, like, this is generational effects. Like, you have the power to stop these generational things just like by getting a little uncomfortable, but you choose not to. Like, that's ridiculous.
I was thinking when we talked about the men versus women, and I don't really think it's the versus. I think there's a lot of different kind of avenues to take. Let's think about, like, when you talk about rape, that's really control, right? Power and control. And so when we talk about, especially with men, the hyper masculinity that not only they put on themselves, that we as women put on them, right? Because I've heard so many young women, you know, I need a man that could do this. I need a man that could do that. I don't want no punk. I was in a group, and somebody posted a question, and these were like fully adult people talking, not, yeah, I mean, like 30s, I mean 40s and 50s, and they're talking about, if your man got knocked out, would he still be your man? And I'm like, are we even having this conversation? you know, like, and again, the hyper masculinity that we say we want a man that's going to lead us. We want, I like it when my dude puts me in check. Okay, so this is what we have on one end. And then on the other end, we're telling them, well, but we still need you to protect us and be safe and be kind and this and that and the other. And that's a dichotomy that I think we need as women to be clear on what that looks like, right? Masculinity can still look like telling your guy friend, like, dude, stop. You're not being a punk. You're not somehow salting his game. You're saying, like, this is not what we're about. But why is it that that doesn't happen? Because now how do we look at the guy that does the intervening, right? Do we look at him as being soft? Do we look at him? I mean, I've seen young ladies that have, you know, said stuff about men who chosen not to take them up on a sexual endeavor, and they talk about him like a dog, right? Oh, he was, you know, he must be gay, that, this and that and the other. And I'm just like, and these are young ladies, and I'm like, why is this? Like, maybe he's saying he's not into you, he's not interested. So instead of doing this act that is hugely intimate, he's saying, like, no, I'm going to respect you enough to say that I'm not feeling you like that, so I'm not going to take that or be a part of that. And that's not what's recognized. So when we say men versus women, I think it's more so trying to have an understanding of what respect looks like, how we want it to show up, and translating that so that everybody in the conversation understands that. And if we can get to a point, both as men and women, where we're talking the same thing, this is what respect looks like on both of our ends, then we can start having these conversations.
Point. And I think it sounds like as a culture, we prescribe to like strict gender roles, but with that comes the bad parts, and that we haven't really figured out how to kind of navigate or understand like the nuances, so that it's healthy, like a healthy balance of power and control between both or whatever spectrum of genders.
Speaking of gender roles, I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough is that those need to be interrogated, right? Like Logan mentioned earlier, non-binary folks, like where are they in this conversation? And like we know from statistics that the women who are getting sexually assaulted, oftentimes predominantly women of color, queer women, bisexual women, trans women, we should be talking about how they're experiencing higher rates of sexual assault than non-queer, non-binary folks, women are experiencing it. Because it's not separate from the culture of rape. It's not separate from these conversations. There's so many layers to it that really need to be interrogated in order to shift that culture. And I think, I mean, as a queer person, it's terrifying to talk about those things. You can get ostracized from the queer community to bring up the fact that you were sexually assaulted by somebody within the community. If it's intimate partner violence, similar to what somebody was saying earlier, we want to protect those people. We don't want to involve police, law enforcement, or legal systems, which we know do not serve most people, particularly folks of color and Black people, but also queer people. And there is a huge loss of community because they don't have other communities, right? A lot of times they've been ostracized from their families and their loved ones. And the queer community is the only one they have. And so it is terrifying to really come out and talk about those things because there are real repercussions for them, same way that you all have been talking about as well.
And I will say that and I'll speak for the African American community, up until recently, healthy sexual relationships was, you don't talk about it. You just didn't talk about it. So to really talk about unhealthy sexual relationships, I mean, I grew up in a thing like when something like that happened, you got some holy oil, you went and talked to the pastor, and that's all you got. I mean, it really was, and you got nothing else. There was no going to counseling. There was no going, to, unless it was egregious and you really just got beat up, you went to the pastor with some holy oil and they tried to figure out what you did so you won't this and these are the conversations we had. So to be surprised that we're not having this conversation around unhealthiness in our, sexual relations. And I hate using that. We're just talking about rape culture, but that has nothing to do with sex. And I want to make sure that's, they're separated, right? but we don't have the good conversations. We don't, because of whatever. So we're really not going to jump on the bad one.
I'm sorry, I don't fully understand. How are rape culture separate from sex? Can you elaborate on that?
Right, because rape has nothing to do with sex. Rape has everything to do with power and control. And that's just how, so like sex is wonderful and it's good and it comes from a loving place and it's supposed to feel good. So I intentionally separate those two languages because in my world, I never want those to mix. So maybe I guess that's what I should have said. So that's my intention because sex is a good thing, rape is not. And so I don't want to intermingle that.
A lot of people, there's people who have been assaulted multiple times and don't know what a healthy sex life actually looks like as well. So it's so complex because, like you said, separating two, sex is good, rape is bad. And for some people, unfortunately, all they've experienced is the bad.
As I've been sitting here listening, it also makes me like think deeper and think back to when do we start having the healthy conversations about emotions and about expressing ourselves and about, hey, you know what, if I'm not feeling okay, let me express that I'm not feeling okay. Like how Miss Beverly was stating, when stuff used to happen, oh, go to the church. I mean, even if you look up how counseling and the church, how people are still trying to separate them today. And so it's a lot of things that have happened that are generational to where it's been, okay, somebody, they may have had something happening in their family with uncle such and such and nobody ever said anything because you're going to be quiet about that, or something happened over here and somebody's dad and the neighbor and all this, and it was, oh, let's be quiet about it. And so then if that keeps going on and somebody sees it as time goes on, they're not figuring like, oh, okay, this is bad because this is something that I've seen my whole life. This is the only thing that I know. Even if it's, even if they're mind like, I don't ever see this anywhere else, but I'm seeing it here. So at what point, or where's that line to where it's like, okay, we have to push for healthy conversations? For example, I didn't understand certain emotions until I started studying counseling when I was in my 20s to know, wait a minute, it's okay to not always be you shouldn't always be in an aggressive situation. It's okay if you cry. It's okay if you're not this strong Black woman that everybody wants you to do, their idea, because if you cry, you're still strong. If you're upset, you're still strong. And I think it's so much of like how we mentioned earlier. If I say something, I'm wrong. If I cry and I'm emotional about it, I'm wrong. If I don't say anything, I'm wrong. And I'm not saying that's the clear cut, but I'm just saying that's how some people genuinely feel. Like no matter what I do, in the terms, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. So it's kind of like, how can we, or where do we start in having a conversation to where people are like, hey, I'm okay expressing my emotions. I'm okay with, hey, if I'm just not feeling it, today just ain't my day. And so then in turn, I feel like then that helps identify, okay, this is a healthy relationship and this isn't, to where you like, wait a minute, if something feels off, you're aware that it feels off more so. Because I think as India was saying, it's sometimes that they may not know that this situation was even bad until later on in life when they sit there and think about it, or they get more education on it and they're like, wait a minute, this 2 and 2 not making 4. Wait a minute. And so it's kind of like,
to speak to Jaharia's point, I think it was something that Mason said earlier, just in terms of like, we get stuck in this whole, like specifically speaking about Black women, we get stuck in this whole little box or whatever, to where we just feel like we have to maintain this whole image of like, yeah, I'm strong or whatever. And I don't know, it's getting used to the idea of it's okay to not be okay. And then it's even things like this this study group or whatever, focus group, that like sometimes someone has to start the conversation, because if someone doesn't start the conversation, it's never going to be started. So I think it's just a mixture. And yes, it's going to take time. I'm not even gonna hold. I don't even think it's gonna happen in our generation, where people are about to be comfortable enough to even address this stuff. But if someone starts it, hey, someone has to at that point.
That's kind of what we're hearing, is the whole secrecy thing. And I just wonder if that's related to also, I would think, racism. Like we don't want to snitch on our own community when they're doing bad because we don't want to look bad. But it's like we're so worried about optics that we're not protecting the actual victims. It's kind of what I'm hearing from this. And it seems to be a sentiment across the board, is that like, yeah, we know that the uncle's doing this to the cousin, but we're not going to say anything because that's embarrassing for us. Like we don't need them finding out that your brother raped your sister. Like that's all bad for us. And it's like we're so worried about how that looks and not worried enough about how the survivor feels having to see that uncle at Christmas or sit next to that uncle at Thanksgiving because we're supposed to pretend everything's fine.
Everybody in the family is like, well, don't leave Uncle so-and-so with the kids. Like, I had that uncle, right? Like everybody knew that he couldn't be around us, but, and then if somebody got caught slipping, you ain't supposed to let, Chidi around the kids.
You shouldn't be wearing that shirt around Uncle Jerry.
And the fact that so many of us are like nodding along in agreement says something. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been told you need to cover up this and this and this. Like, they're going to look at you this way. And I'm like, I'm 12. So I'm not understanding. I didn't know. Like that was not something that was taught. And I don't even recall it ever being mentioned in 10th grade biology or life science or the family matters. I think it was family life unit. I don't ever recall consent ever being brought up.
I remember, I don't remember when I first learned about consent, but I do remember when I first learned about like coercion and how that is a form of sexual assault. That kind of blew my mind because for those who don't know, like coercion is when someone tries to convince you to change your mind about the consent that they gave you. And I don't know about y'all, but I definitely had that one guy that has tried to change my mind when I've already made up my mind, and how that, or for what is the, I don't remember the correct definition of it, but when someone sneakily like takes off the condom in the middle of sex, that's also a form of sexual assault. And just learning about those little nuances. I knew about the yes and the no and how clear that was. At least I had like great grandparents and parents, but those little nuances I wasn't prepared for going into my womanhood. And those are the things that I wish I knew.
It's just like when it comes to that's the thing with consent. Yeah, coercion really is one of them ones. Coercion is really one of them ones where it's just kind of like, because I don't know. I think about it at the end of the day, not at the end of the day, even thinking about the definition now, but it's like hey, I'm okay with this. I'm going to tell you I'm okay with this. If at some point I am not okay with this, I would like you to know that I'm not okay with this and stop, type thing. If I give you permission if I give you permission and stuff like that, then yes. But also, if I'm not comfortable with it at some point or whatever, safe word. I don't know, safe word. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
I was gonna say, it brings up the discussion of like, we're not taught any of those things growing up, like about safe words, about like coercion specifically, or all of those things to look out for. I don't recall having extensive knowledge of anything related to rape or sex lives or anything until college. And so
that was also something that you had mentioned, where it's like, you're very right. I didn't learn that stuff until college. Like I literally did not learn that stuff until college.
And I kind of wanted to circle back to Beverly's point earlier when you were saying how women sometimes are also part of the problem in terms of like, we're saying these things about men. And I wonder if it's a class thing as well. Like we're all saying we didn't know about it till college. A lot of us, all of us, I think, are college educated. So those people who don't go through college and get the introduction classes and an admit weekend are not ever going to get this information. And so I wonder if it's a class thing too, why we see higher rates of it, because they're not educated on what rape is. And they think that this is normal abuse to take.
I won't say it's necessarily a class. Well, I won't argue that it's not a class thing. However, I think about because I think about the what are they called? Like the sexual harassment things that you have to take like before work or something like that. Because it does happen at like, I don't know, work where people have to work. but that does happen in college. So it's like you can go to college and have experienced that, but not have ever gone to work experience that. But that doesn't mean that you can't go to work experience that.
I feel like in the workspace, it's there, but I don't know if it's always as enforced as it is at the college, like collegiate level, because I feel like on college campuses, people are so scared and so sensitive that it's like a little bit more talked about, not enough, but like I feel like at the work, and at least in my workspaces, it would be like, here's this training, do this, and you'll get paid for it. And that was that. Like it wasn't any deeper than that.
Respect
For me,
Black
I think
women. Oh, sorry.
that
I didn't.
too.
Sorry.
No, I mean, you said it. You hit the nail on the head. It's a respect Black women, but really having honest and robust conversation, not hiding behind, well, good girls don't talk about that, or whatever. Not hiding behind whatever that thing is that we put up, and having those real conversations about, with young people, what does a healthy relationship look like? And if you don't know, then seek that out, right? If you've never seen a healthy relationship, then how are you going to demonstrate one? But how can we say, like, I know maybe my generational curse is that my daughter has never seen me date in a healthy way. So let me find resources, because that's a real conversation I got to have with myself, right? I got to look at myself. I got to look in that mirror and be like, girl, you've been on that bullshit. Now we're not going to give this to our daughter because somewhere it clicked. And so now I'm gonna have a real conversation with her and say, like, maybe you've seen mommy go through things that it's not okay. And mommy's gonna get help for herself, so I can make sure I help you. That I think would be a really good starting point, because a lot of us are suffering from generational trauma, generational hurts, right? That our grandparents and now our parents brought to us. And now here we are, and we're trying to figure it out, and we don't have the tools. It's like, here's all this hurt that I'm handing you with an empty toolbox. So I just think those peeling back the layers, stop doing that. We don't let people see our dirty laundry, and we need to start washing some clothes.
Ms. Beverly, do you think that there's a certain time that you should talk to like children about these, or like the youth and stuff like that in general?
Well, I started like with through work, we started talking to fifth graders about consent and what it looks like. And we don't necessarily surround it about sex, but it's just about, if your friend doesn't want you to touch them, if your friend doesn't want you to poke them, those little things, because that leads into, as we get older, you have ownership of your body. Like, even with myself, I come from a black family. We regular black. But in our family, you're supposed to hug all your adults, right? My youngest daughter is not a hugger. She doesn't like people like doing that. And so I have to give her agency and ownership to say, you speak to your elders, but you don't have to hug your elders, because you have ownership of your body. And that's difficult. That was a difficult transition for me. And so professionally, we start about fifth grade. I started intentionally giving my daughter at a very young age ownership of her own self. Even with like when she goes to go stay with her dad, if she don't want to kiss me goodbye, she don't have to kiss me goodbye. You got to speak though, but I give you that, right? She gets to own that. And so just changing, I don't know if that answers your question, but just, I think we need to start doing it early and recognize it.
Just echoing off of what Miss Beverly just said, I think the overall thing specifically for the Black community in order to address rape culture is to change a lot of precedent that's already in our culture. The precedent of the Black church, the precedent of what happens in my house stays in my house, the precedent of like all of those different things that we see have been passed down generation to generation. And some of them are, they can be healthy, but others are not so healthy, and it's to our detriment moving forward as a culture, moving forward to that place that we want to be, where both sex or all genders can come together and have healthier relationships, healthier intimate relationships, healthier sexual relationships, and that'll overall improve relationships within ourselves and relationships with others as well.
I was just gonna say that part about like communication and talking about it, because like Miss Beverly was saying, when it comes to like hugging and stuff like that, I feel like that's important to go ahead and tell your kids when they're younger, hey, if you don't want to hug somebody, that's fine. But my mom said, hey, if you're gonna walk in the room, at least speak, and if somebody does something to you, you can let me know. But that's then also a part of how we just got to be real about it, in a sense of, some people said growing up, like their parents gave nicknames to private parts. Why? Just say, hey, penis, vagina, like, come on, let's. So then if I sit here and tell you as a kid, hey, somebody touched my penis, my vagina, you're able to, take it for what it is. Like if we start off sugarcoating something that's natural, that's happening, that's there, then it may, like, I think so. Overall, what I'm really trying to say is, let's just talk. I wish we could talk about it more and just be like, here you go. Because if you sit here and you just take it for what it is, instead of like, oh, it could be that, it may confuse a kid. And I honestly feel like that could sometimes be like, a kid could be trying to tell you, hey, somebody touched my pocketbook, somebody touched my cookie jar, and you not realizing, hey, somebody didn't touch them inappropriate. You think, oh, your little purse over there is so cute. And now in their mind, so just be real and understand, like, as we've been talking about, hey, sex is one thing and rape is over here, and in this area you're allowed to say breast and booty and everything else and be okay with your body, be okay with who you are. And I feel like that's something that I wish would happen. Just let's talk about it for what it is, because either we have it or we don't, and accept it, and let's talk, just keep pushing from that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think in order for us to have more real conversations, I also feel like part of it has to be like accountability that we have to work on, and taking accountability for the stuff that we've already done. And like, I know for myself, like when you would ask the question of like, when did you learn about consent? Like, I didn't learn about consent until my friends called me out. And like, that really shook me, because I was just like, I didn't see what was wrong with like having sex drunk. And then they were like, no, this is not okay. And if it wasn't for them, I could have ended up doing something I definitely didn't want to do. And I think that like it takes accountability though to even own that. Like I could have made a huge mistake. I could have hurt somebody if I hadn't learned these things. And I think that accountability goes both ways, not just taking accountability for our ignorance, but also taking accountability for the ways that we can hurt other people as well.